I have set bones and pulled bobbies into this world for 40 years out of a clapboard office on the main street of Ledger's Crossing, and in all that time, the strangest thing I ever watched heal was not a body at all. It was two stubborn people who walked into a marriage swearing it meant nothing, and came out the far side of a hard year meaning everything by it. I was there for the start of it and the middle, and I am proud to say I was there for the end, which was really a beginning. Let me tell it the way it happened. It began the autumn the bank called Holly's bruise note. Holly's was our saddler, and a fine one, and when his heart gave out on a cold morning while he was oiling a cinch strap, the whole town felt the loss of him. He left behind a clean reputation, a shop full of good leather, and a daughter named Calla who could stitch a saddle every bit as true as her father. He also left behind a note at the crossing bank that he'd taken to buy the building, and which he had very nearly paid off and not quite. I tell you all this so you understand that Calla Brew was not a helpless creature waiting on a man. She was 24, brown-haired, square-shouldered, with hands that knew work and a way of looking straight at you that some men found unsettling. The morning after the funeral she opened the shop. She ran it well. But the bank's man, a soft fellow named Prout who hid behind a ledger and a watch chain, came around within the month to inform her that a single woman could not, in the bank's judgment, carry the note, and that the building would be sold out from under her at the turn of the year unless arrangements were made. "What arrangements?" Calla said. She did not say it as a question. She said it the way you'd test a board before you put your weight on it. Prout cleared his throat and looked at the watch chain instead of at her, and what he meant, and would not quite say, came clear soon enough. There was a man in town, a widower named Orrin Tate who owned the feed store and a good deal of the talk, and Orrin had decided in his own mind that the saddler's daughter and the saddler's shop made a tidy package, and that he was just the man to take them both in hand. He came calling with a tin of store candy and a great deal of opinion about how a woman alone could not manage. He told her, kindly he thought, that he would speak to Prout about the note, that the two matters could be settled together, and that she need not trouble her head. I was in the shop the afternoon he said it, having come for a new throat strap for my buggy harness. I saw Calla's face go very still. She thanked Orrin Tate for the candy in a voice you could have skated on, and when the door shut behind him, she set the tin down on the counter and looked at it for a long moment. "He thinks the shop comes with me," she said, "like a chimney comes with a house." "Most men do think that way," I said. "It's a failing in the breed." "I won't be rescued into a marriage I didn't choose, Doc. I'd rather lose the shop honest than keep it as a thing somebody owns along with me." "That's a hard road," I said. "It's mine to walk." Now here is where Mercer Lowe comes into it. Mercer ran cattle and a string of fine horses out on Cinnabar Flat, where Antler Creek cuts down off the hills, a good hour's ride from town. He was a big quiet man somewhere past 30 who had buried a wife years back. She died of a fever the same winter their baby did, and after that, Mercer had folded up the soft part of himself and put it away where it couldn't be got at. He came to town for supplies and sailed days and not much else. People mistook his silence for hardness. I knew better because I had been the doctor who could not save his wife, and I had seen the man sit by her grave on the bench he'd built there until the lantern burned out. That fall, a misery of a different kind had come to Mercer's door. His younger sister, Sable Lowe, married to a man who'd gone west chasing silver and never come back, had died of consumption down in the valley, and left behind a boy of 7 named Toby. Mercer was the only blood the child had left. He brought the boy home to Cinnabar Flat without a word of complaint and meant to raise him. The trouble was a man named Wendell Cobb, a cousin of the dead husband, who lived 2 counties over and had got it into his head that the boy ought to come to him, not out of love, you understand, but because Sable's husband's claim had turned out to hold a thin vein of silver after all, and a guardian controls a ward's property. Cobb wrote letters. Then Cobb got a lawyer. And the lawyer's argument, which a county judge was willing to entertain, was this: That a lone bachelor working a ranch was no fit home for a small motherless child, that there was no woman to keep house and tend the boy, and that the child would be better placed with a proper family, meaning Cobb's. It was nonsense, and it was also the kind of nonsense the law sometimes honors. Mercer came to me about it, because there wasn't another soul in the county he'd say a private word to. "They want to take Toby," he said. We were standing by the corral while the boy threw a loop at a fence post, missing every time and grinning anyway. "Cobb's man says a hearing set for after the new year. Says a ranch with no woman in it is no place for a child." "And is it?" I asked him, not unkind. He watched the boy. "I don't know how to braid a girl's hair," he said, "but I know how to keep a boy fed and warm and learned and loved. That ought to count." "It ought to," I said. "Whether it will is another thing. Judges like to see a tidy household. They like to see a wife." He looked at me then, and I watched the whole impossible shape of it cross his face. The idea that to keep the one bit of family he had left, he would need to take a wife he did not want and could not imagine, and break open the door he'd nailed shut over his heart. He shook his head once hard, the way a horse shakes off a fly. "I won't court some poor woman just to use her for a hearing," he said. "That's a low thing to do to a person." "It is," I agreed, and I wanted on the record that I, Amory Pace, did not engineer one bit of what came next. I only happened to be the place where these two troubles got set down side by side. I told Mercer to go home and think, and I went back to my office, and I did not say one word to Calabrew about any of it. She figured it out her own self. That was the kind of woman she was. It was 3 days later. She'd heard the talk. Everybody had, the way everybody hears everything in a town the size of a thumbnail, about the low boy and the cousin and the hearing. And she'd had Orrin Tate in her shop again with his candy and his certainty, and Prout with his watch chain, and she had lain awake doing the arithmetic of her life. And somewhere in the dark, she'd seen the shape of a thing that solved 2 problems with 1 piece of paper. She rode out to Cinnabar Flat on a borrowed mare on a gray cold morning. I know exactly what she said because both of them told me, later, on separate occasions, and the 2 tellings matched close enough that I believe it. She found Mercer mending fence along Antler Creek. He straightened up when he saw her, surprised, and touched his hat and waited, because waiting was his chief skill. "Mr. Lowe," she said, "you don't know me well. I'm Calabrew, Holly's Brew's daughter, the saddler." "I know your work," he said. "I've got one of your father's bridles, best I ever owned." She nodded and got down to it because getting down to it was hers. "You've a hearing coming. A cousin wants your sister's boy, and the law's pretending a ranch with no wife in it is no home. Is that right?" The muscle in his jaw worked. "It is. And I've a bank calling my father's note, and a widower who means to take the shop and me along with it. Is that something you've heard?" "I've heard it." "Then I've a proposition, and I'd ask you to hear all of it before you say no." She stood very straight by the creek with her chin up, and I have always thought it must have taken more courage than I'll ever own to say what she said next to a stranger, plain, with no softening. "Marry me. On paper. A true marriage in the eyes of the law and the church, but a bargain between us and nothing more. You get a wife in your household, and a woman to make that hearing a foolishness. I'll keep your house, I'll mind the boy. I'll stand up in any courtroom and swear that home is fit because it will be. And I keep my shop, my name on my own work, my note paid down out of what the shop earns, and a husband who has no claim on me. He doesn't ask plainly, and I don't freely give. We each keep our own self. We each keep what's ours. Nobody owns anybody. When the boy's safe and the note's clear, if we want loose of it, we say so, honest and part friends. That's the whole of it." Mercer Lowe looked at her for what she swore was a full minute. Then he said the truest thing I think he had said aloud in years. "That's a fair sight more honest than most marriages I've watched." "Is that a yes?" "It's a let me think on a thing this size for one night," he said. "You'll stay to dinner. The boy ought to meet you before you decide you can stand us." So she stayed. And Toby, who had been wary as a barn cat with every grown person since his mother died, took one look at Calabrew mending the broken strap on his little saddle with her own quick fingers. She could not help herself. She saw a thing wanted fixing and she fixed it, and decided she was all right. By the time she rode home in the dusk, it was settled in everything but the saying. They were married 11 days later in the small church at Ledger's Crossing, with me standing up as a witness and the preacher's wife as the other, and Toby holding the ring on a clean handkerchief. Orrin Tate did not come. He stood across the street outside the feed store with his arms folded, and when it was done and they walked out into the cold sunshine, man and wife, he turned and went inside and did not show his face for a week. I confess I enjoyed that part more than a doctor ought. They had a paper, too. I never saw it, but I knew it existed because Mercer told me of it that same winter. A thing Calla had written out in her good clear hand, and they had both signed, laying down the terms of the bargain plain. Separate rooms. Her shop hers, his ranch his. No claim either way that wasn't asked and freely answered. He kept it folded in the drawer of the writing desk that had been his wife's, and I think the both of them touched it now and then like a fence they'd agreed not to climb. Now I could tell you the year passed and they fell in love and leave it there, but that would cheat you of the parts that matter, which were small and slow and made of weather and work, the way the realest things always are. It started, as I heard it, with the harness. Mercer's working harness was a patched, ill-mended ruin. He had no eye for leather and no patience for it, and he'd been getting by on baling wire and prayer. Calla could not abide it. The third evening she was out there, after supper, after Toby was abed, she carried his harness in by the kitchen lamp and took it apart and put it back together right, the way her father had taught her, oiling and stitching and trimming, while Mercer sat across the table pretending to read the almanac and watching her hands over the top of it. Neither said much. But the next morning when he hitched up his team, the leather sat easy and true for the first time in years, and he stood in the cold a moment with his hand on the trace, and then he came back in and said, "Gruff, that was a kindness, thank you." And she said, "It was an offense to my eyes is what it was." And he almost smiled. I am told he almost smiled. It went on like that. She found the house had been run by a man and a memory and set it to rights without ever once making him feel scolded for it. He found she rode out to her shop in town 3 days a week, rain or shine, and rather than grumble he started driving her and himself on the buckboard and finding errands to keep him there till closing, so she'd not ride home alone in the dark. She noticed. She did not say she noticed. That was their way, a whole conversation carried on in things done rather than things said, which is a language some marriages never learn, and these two were fluent in from the start. And there was the boy between them, which changed everything. Toby was a grief-quiet child when Calla came, too still, too watchful, a boy who'd learned not to want things because wanting had only taught him how it felt to lose them. Calla did not crowd him. She just left a place for him at the edge of whatever she was doing, a stool by the workbench, a bowl to lick, a strap to hold, and let him come to her in his own time, the way you gentle a colt. By Christmas he was her shadow. By the deep of winter he called her Calla without thinking, and once, half asleep, he called her something else, and she went very still and did not correct him and did not look at Mercer, and Mercer in the doorway did not say a word, and I think that was the night, though neither of them would ever have called it that the paper in the drawer started to come undone. The fever came in February. It went through Ledger's Crossing and out to the ranches the way fevers do, and it caught Toby hard. I rode out to Cinnabar Flat through a sky like wet ash and found the boy burning up in the back room, and Calla Low, I should say, though nobody called her that yet, sitting beside him with her sleeves pushed up and her face gray with fear and her hands steady as a surgeon's. She'd done everything right before I got there. Cool cloths, willow bark tea, the window cracked and the fire built. The boy talked to Low and steady through the worst of his thrashing. For 3 nights it was bad. I stayed the first night. I couldn't stay all of them, with half the county sick. So it was Calla and Mercer who sat up with that boy, turn and turn about, and somewhere in those 3 nights the last of the wall between them simply quit standing. There's no fortress holds against a sick child at 3 in the morning. I came back the third evening and found them both at the bedside, her hand on the boy's forehead and his hand over hers without either of them seeming to know it was there. And the fever broke clean an hour before dawn, and Toby opened his eyes and asked for water and asked, in the small voice of a boy who'd been a long way off, whether his mama was there, meaning Calla, I think, by then, and Calla said, "I'm right here," and did not let go of his hand, and Mercer Lowe, that great silent man, put his face in his free hand and his shoulders shook, and Calla reached over the sleeping boy and laid her hand on the back of Mercer's neck, and the 3 of them stayed like that until the sun came up. I drove home in the morning light thinking that whatever that paper in the drawer said, it had been a dead letter for some while. Spring came on. The note got paid down, steady, out of the saddlery and out of the ranch both, because Mercer quietly began bringing her leather work and sending the hands to her for repairs and never once made a charity. He paid the going rate and argued when she tried to give discount, which made her furious, which made him almost smile, which was by then his chief and secret amusement in life. By April the shop was hers free and clear of Prout and his watch chain, the note settled, her father's name still over the door. She'd done it, earned it. Nobody had rescued her. She'd built the rescue herself out of one honest bargain and a year of work, and I have never in my life been prouder to witness a thing. Which left only the matter of the hearing, and Wendell Cobb and the boy. It came up in May in the county seat, a day's travel off. I went along, partly as a friend and partly because a doctor's word carries in a courtroom. Cobb was there, a thin, grasping man with a thin, grasping lawyer, and his whole case was the old one, the unfit bachelor, the womanless ranch, the poor neglected child. The lawyer painted it thick. Then Calla Lowe stood up. She had on her good dress and her straight back and that look that unsettled soft men, and she told the court the plain truth, which is the most powerful thing a person can carry into a room full of lawyers. She told them Toby Lowe was fed and clothed and schooled and loved. She told them she had nursed him through a fever that nearly took him, with her own hands, in that very ranch house they called unfit. She told them the boy slept easy and laughed loud and had put on 10 pounds since winter, and she dared anybody in the room to find a child better cared for in the whole county. And when Cobb's lawyer asked her, sly, what manner of woman would marry a stranger on a week's acquaintance, and what that said about the household, she did not flinch. It says, she told him, that 2 people looked at trouble honest and chose to face it together instead of alone. There's marriages in this county built on a great deal less. I'd put mine against any of them. And she looked at the judge and she said, quiet, ask the boy who his mother is, sir, and watch his face, and then tell me whose home is fit. They did not have to ask the boy. The judge had heard enough, and I believe he had taken the measure of Wendell Cobb and his silver vein somewhere about the first 10 minutes. He found for Mercer. Toby stayed. Cobb went home 2 counties over with his lawyer and his disappointment, and as far as I know spent neither love nor thought on the child again, which told you all you needed about what he'd really been after. We drove home the next day, the 4 of us in the wagon, for I'd come along, remember, with Toby asleep against Calla's side and the spring hills going green around us, and nobody said very much, and the not saying was full to the brim. It was high summer before either of them did anything about the thing that everyone but the 2 of them had long since known. Here is how it happened, and I have it from Mercer himself, who told me with his ears red as a boy's. He had gone of an evening to his late wife's writing desk and taken the paper from the drawer, their bargain, in Calla's clear hand, the terms of the marriage that was meant to mean nothing. He stood holding it a long time. Then he carried it out to the kitchen where Calla was at the lamp, mending a strap as she did near every night because she could not sit idle, and Toby was long abed, and he stood there until she looked up. "That's our paper," she said. "It is." "You want to call it off?" She said it steady, but he told me her hands had gone still over the leather, And I have always believed that in that one still moment Calla Brew, who feared no bank and no orientate and no courtroom, was more afraid than she had been in the whole of that hard year. "No," Mercer said, "I want to burn it." And he did. He bent and put the corner to the lamp flame and held it while it caught, and then he laid it in the cold hearth and let it go to ash, the whole of their careful bargain, the separate rooms and the no claims and the part friends when it's done. And he stood up and he said, gruff, plain, the only way he knew, but I'd wager he'd practiced it on the ride home from the fence all that week. "I don't want the bargain, Calla. I want the marriage. The real one. I have wanted it since about the night you fixed my harness and called it an offense to your eyes, and I have been too much a coward to say so for fear you'd hold me to the paper. You came out to my fence a year ago and offered to save us both, and you did. Now I'm asking you a different thing, and there's no note and no hearing in it, and you can say no and nothing changes. You keep your shop and your name and you're half the bed of this house as long as you want it. But I'm asking, will you stay? For good? For real? Because I love you and the boy loves you, and this is your home if you'll have it, and I am done pretending otherwise." And Calla Low, who had refused to be rescued, who had built her own standing with her own 2 hands so that no man would ever own her along with her chimney, Calla set down the strap, and stood up, and crossed that kitchen, and took the face of that great silent grieving healing man in both her capable hands, and she said, "You fool. I burned my half of that paper at Christmas. I just never told you in case you wanted out." They were married a second time that autumn, not because they had to be. The first one held fine in the eyes of God and the county both, but because they wanted to stand up and say the words again and mean them the way they hadn't been let to mean them the first time. Same church, same preacher. Toby held the ring again, taller by a head. Half the town came, and Orrin Tate did not, and Prout did, and shook Mercer's hand, watch chain and all. I stood up as witness for the second time, which I am told is unusual, and I did not mind it one bit. I still drive out to Cinnabar Flat now and again, when my old bones allow. The saddlery in town still has brew over the door, and Calla still works it, and there's a sign now that says LOWE and BRUE, because Toby's grown and apprenticed to her, and stamps his own name in the leather alongside hers. Mercer's hair's gone gray and his herd's the finest in the county, and his harness, I am pleased to report, is mended right. The bench by the first wife's grave is still tended. Calla tends it, which tells you the size of the woman. And on the porch of an evening the two of them sit, not saying much, carrying on that whole conversation in quiet they were fluent in from the day she rode out to his fence with a bargain and a straight back. I've delivered a great many things in my 40 years here, but I tell the young folks when they'll listen that the soundest marriage I ever watched made was the one that started with no romance in it at all, just 2 honest people looking at trouble plain and choosing not to face it alone. The love wasn't in the start of it. The love was in the year. It always is. That's the whole of it, and it's true, every word, and I was there.